Let us begin. Today's class is going to be on writing mechanics. So this is basically punctuation, capitalization, all of these tools that we have to visually alter our writing that help us convey our ideas and our train of thought better. We will begin with capitalization, which is really short and simple. You should know most of it, but I will still go over it and over some things that you might still not know because they're sort of very specific to certain cases. So we'll begin with what you should know at this point. What you should know is that proper nouns and adjectives always start with a capital letter, and that the first word in every sentence always starts with a capital letter. If you don't know that, we're in trouble. But some interesting things that you probably don't know is, for example, when you're talking about last names, some last names that are common in English-speaking countries start with Mac, O, and Saint. And all of these last names have the next letter after these little prefixes, I guess, capitalized. So an example would be O'Malley, then Mary St. Clair. Next letter is capitalized, okay? Good. Then also you capitalize the official titles of a person. So director something, professor something, dean something, head mistress something. All of those things you capitalize when they come before the name, right? When you're referring to a specific person and you want to put their title there as well. Then lastly, I just want to reiterate that there are proper adjectives as well, not just proper nouns. One of them would be a nationality like American. So the American people, that's capitalized. And that is something that you might not know. So yeah, capitalization is pretty simple. So if anyone has any questions, I'll answer them now. Now we move on. No? All right, let's move on. Now we'll begin with sort of the meat of this class. This is what we're really going to be talking about for basically the entire length. It's punctuation. It's all of the different types of punctuations that we can use to convey our reading better. Punctuation sets the pace for the reader. It tells us when to stop, when to breathe. When you're reading out loud, you need to breathe. Obviously, you need to stop because you can't just keep going. But even when you're reading to yourself, it feels pretty bad when you're just reading something nonstop because there's no commas or periods. Why? Because there's actually proof that the way we sort of think about things is verbal. So it's like we are talking in our minds. It's like we have this little voice in our minds that's reading it just like we would read them, like we would read it out loud. And so punctuation just works the same way for a mental reading session. Punctuation clears up the train of thought. So it basically tells us what emotion we're supposed to read it with, what the character or the writer is feeling, when to stop, how to organize these sentences, and when we're switching from one idea to the next, and how abrupt is the switch, all of those things. Punctuation is vital for us to understand reading, really. And I mean, lastly, it also cleans up the writing visually. It sort of looks better, you know? It looks much better to look at a piece of writing that has diverse punctuation marks than just a sort of string of words that is never punctuated, never capitalized. It's bad. Okay, without further ado, let's go into the specific topics that we'll talk about today. First topic is the period. The period is like the basic punctuation mark. It's the easiest one to use because it indicates the end of a sentence. It indicates the end of declarative sentences, which, if you remember correctly, are just statements about things that are. But it also indicates the end of sentences that are mild commands. So imperative sentences, if you remember, could use periods, exclamation marks, and question marks, depending on the case. And so a mild command would be this example below: pass me the salt, please. It's just like I'm not really showing any emotion. I'm not really asking a question. I'm just saying, do this for me, please. And even though it's not a declarative sentence, it still takes a period because a period sort of implies that there's a level tone of voice. And that's what I wanted to get we're going to try and understand a lot of these punctuation marks in terms of how we read them and how we enunciate them, because it'll help create a direct connection between how you speak and how you write for you to draw from, you know, to make it easier to learn these things. Periods indicate that the sentence doesn't really have a strong emotion. It indicates that I'm reading something like I'm talking right now with a tone of voice that doesn't really fluctuate too much, you know? A period also indicates a long pause. It's the longest type of pause that we will find, really. Maybe accepting the ellipsis points, which we'll get into later. But yeah, it indicates the end of a sentence. So another use of the period is also to punctuate abbreviations like Dr., Mr., Sir, Junior, all those things. They take a period afterwards. Any questions about periods? Nope. All right, let's move on. The question mark. The question mark is not very difficult. Question mark punctuates interrogative sentences. Whenever I'm asking a question, we use a question mark. And imperative questions are included. Imperative questions are imperative sentences that take the form of a question. So like this, would you pass me the salt, please? This is a question, and we know that it is a question. So it follows that it is punctuated as a question. Now, I told you that we can tell it is a question, but why can we tell it is a question? When we talk, our voice changes when we're asking a question. There's a higher pitched voice inflection. So, and this is not always the same, because I can be talking like this, very monotone without shifting my tone. But when I'm asking a question, I go like, what is this? It's a very slight tone variation. But if I'm talking like this, changing my voice a lot, when I ask a question, it'll be even higher. It'll be like, what am I doing today? You know, it'll always be a little bit higher than the declarative sentence. And you will be able to tell when it is a question because of that. And because you'll have like relative pronouns starting the question, like, or interrogative pronouns, like what will you do, or where, or when, and all that stuff. But just to sort of help you make a link between how you speak and how you write it. Okay, an example of a question is, where's the fire, for example? You can see that the voice goes up and there's clearly a pronoun, an interrogative pronoun at the beginning. Question, really simple, all good. There's a special case that I want to talk about though with the question mark, because this is something that I've used before because I'm a fan of expressing emotion clearly in writing. And even though that might make me sound a little informal at times because it's sort of not commonly used punctuation, this can help as a vessel when you're writing it. It's called the interrobang, and I actually looked it up specifically because it's something that I used before. It's a double punctuation. It's a question mark followed by an exclamation mark. And what it shows is a strongly emotional question. So what in the world? It's like a very, it's a question and you can tell, but it's also very strongly emotive. I'm really surprised by whatever happened. So if you really want to convey that emotion clearly, then you can punctuate it like this because you'll know it's a question that's showing strong emotion. Any questions about anything here? No? Okay, great. Moving on to the exclamation mark. The exclamation marks indicate strong emotions in a statement or command. So they punctuate strong imperatives and strong statements. And when we speak exclamation marks, we can tell because our voice increases in volume and energy. We don't necessarily increase the pitch like a question. It's not like a, what are you doing? Like something like that. It's just stronger. If I'm talking normally like this, I'll be like, stop. It'll just like sound like a surprise, like a shock, like I'm shouting, So, yep, that's how you tell an exclamation mark is there when you're speaking. An example of a strong statement is, you're hurting him. You're stating that something is happening, but you're stating it emotionally, right? Because you want the person to stop. You're not just stating it for like a scientific article or something. you're wanting the person to stop right now. And so you're telling them that they're hurting that person. And an example of a strong imperative is stop what you're doing right now. It's just when you know, it's not a mild command. You want it to stop right now because you know it's about to happen and you know it doesn't have to happen. You can stop it. So stop it, right? All right. Any questions about the exclamation marks? Nope. All right. Let's move on. The comma. The comma is probably the most important punctuation mark alongside the period because we use it all the time, and some of you definitely overuse it. I would say most of us overuse it. That's the truth. Because we're afraid of going into all of those other complicated punctuation marks like semicolons or dashes or colons because they're kind of fuzzy and we don't really know when to use them. But a comma is always correct, right? No, it is not. But it is. Brief because it's just comma after comma after comma after comma after comma, and you just don't get to stop. And that's definitely wrong because what you're trying to do as a writer is facilitate your content to the reader. You don't want to make them work for it. You want to portray what you're portraying in the most effective, clear, and concise way possible. And more often than not, commas are not that. Commas do not achieve that many times. Commas are and are supposed to be used, for example, when you're separating items on lists. So I have oranges, apples, bananas, blah, 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 comma, comma, comma. And you can just tell because you're doing this movement with your hand and you're just stopping with your mind and you know that there's a comma there. They can also separate clauses in sentences with a conjunction, and we'll get to examples later. And they can also be appositives. If you remember what appositives were like a short explanation that goes in between commas that I'll use an example for in the next slide too. Commas are a short pause. That's why they don't really finish a sentence or let you breathe for that matter. And the way you know that a comma's there is try to speak your sentence. You'll feel like a switch going on. It's like Maria was running to the playground, but she fell down. You know there's something there. You can just tell that there's a switch in that idea. That it's just like kind of, I'm in this lane in a street and I'm just like, whoop, sort of turning my car a little bit. And you can tell. That's a comma. It's not very strong, but it's there and you can tell it's there. Now let's get to some examples of commas. An appositive would be Mario, the lead surgeon on the case, comma, the lead surgeon on the case, comma. That's an appositive. It's explaining who Mario is. A list is exactly what I said before, apples, comma, oranges, comma, bananas. A complex sentence, which is independent plus dependent clause, that's a complex sentence, is she did what was asked of her, comma, but she didn't do it well. See how you can just tell? And in these three cases, you can just tell that you're sort of moving away a little bit from the main idea. Not completely, but you can tell that there's something going on. I don't know if you guys have ever played Mario Kart, but it's sort of like taking a curve. You're turning the wheel and you're turning a little bit. Not very strongly, but you are. The semicolon. The semicolon is sort of what would happen if the period and the comma had a kid. It's a longer pause than a comma, but a shorter pause than a period. It can hold two independent clauses together, but it cannot be the end of a sentence. That's how it's like right in the middle. It does not end a sentence, but separates two independent clauses. For example, Sophia is vicious and relentless. With her on our side, we will win this competition. Can you guys tell how it's different than a comma and then a period? Please let me know if you don't. Anyone? No? Okay, I'm gonna explain it anyway. Yeah, who is it?
Andres.
Andres, yeah.
I think it's like it gives you like two different ideas.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're using two independent clauses there. A semicolon is strong enough to hold two ideas that can stand on their own. So these two could really be sentences on their own. You can see that. Even the way they're worded, they're okay to be sentences on their own. However, why do we use the semicolon? Here's my pro tip. Use semicolons for two related complete ideas. When you have two sentences that can stand on their own, but they're very closely related. Look at this case, for example. The first sentence, what is it doing? It's saying what Sophia is. And right along the same line of what Sophia is what she can do, what she can help us do. It's talking about the same subject, really. So we don't really need a period to show such strong separation. We can just do with a semicolon that makes them both part of the same sentence while making clear that they're separate ideas that work on their own. Does that make sense? Good.
Teacher, can you like say it again so I write down? And because I never really thought of semicolon that way, like this way before.
Let me give you an analogy. I'm going to stay on the Mario Kart analogy. You're on your car. If you've ever played Mario Kart, there's a lot of tracks that have like an abyss that you can fall into when you're not driving right. So you turn too fast and you fall off the edge. What happens is there's this little cloud character that kind of picks you up with a hook and puts you back in the race. That's what's happening with a semicolon. You're not just taking a turn, you're falling off and they're putting you back there. You're starting a new sentence, but you're not really changing the whole track, you know? You're not really changing the entire idea, but you're still moving on to a different idea. Does that make sense? Good. I'm trying to be as clear as possible because let me tell you, I tried to find explanations like this, but I didn't find them anywhere. I found like a set of rules. It was like 60 rules about how to use punctuation. And you guys would have hated that. I hate that because I can never remember all those things. So I'm trying to give you guys like a conceptual basis for when to use and how to generalize these punctuations. So I'm sorry if it's not completely clear, but it's really, really the best I can do. Anyone have any questions about the semicolon? All right. Oh yeah, who is it?
Could you maybe explain the difference between a semicolon and like the line? I forgot the name of that one.
Dash.
The line that separates two sentences, like the difference between those two. I forgot the name of that one.
The line, like
hyphen.
Like the guion, the double guion.
Yeah, that's what I mean. Yeah.
That's the dash, and I will get into that because the dash is one of the punctuation marks I'm going to talk about. So I'm going to leave your question for later, okay? But I'm going to answer it. All right, moving on to the colon, not the body part, the punctuation mark. A colon indicates the beginning of a list. So you've seen this thousands of times when there's a recipe and it says the steps are as follow. Number 1, heat the oven to 100 degrees. Number 2, keep the potatoes for 15 minutes. Number 3, boil the water. Number 4, serve and you're ready to enjoy your meal. That's a colon. You use a colon before beginning a list. Now there's another use of a colon, which is a direct explanation of a previous statement, which is the example that I have, because making a list was kind of complicated here. So that's the example I'm going to show you, because it's also a harder one to understand. Look at this sentence. The Pope has spoken. This year's Easter Mass will be celebrated remotely. Now, if you are struggling to understand how exactly a colon is the only thing that's appropriate here, you're not alone. I'm struggling too, and I was struggling to find a way to explain this so that it was clear to you. The reason for this is, well, first, I want to make clear that a colon is not the only thing that would work here. It's not the only thing that we could really realistically use. We could use other things. The colon is the best one we can use, the most appropriate one, and I'm going to explain why that is. A colon is basically subordinating the second sentence to the first one and saying that it's explaining it. So if we put a semicolon here, for example, we would be treating these as two related ideas that are of the same level, of the same hierarchy, that are of equal rank. And the truth is, this year's Easter Mass will be celebrated remotely is a sentence on its own, so that would not be wrong technically. However, we know that the reason why we put the second sentence here is to explain the first. So the ideal type of punctuation would be one that let the reader know that this second sentence is subordinated to the first one. It's really what it's doing is explaining the first one. It would not be fine on its own because its role is only to explain what was already been said before. Does that make sense? And you'll notice the difference with the other punctuation when I get to the other marks that can sort of also be correct, because a dash would work here. And let me see. No, I think a dash is it. I mean, maybe sure a comma with a coordinating conjunction, but that I think you guys will know why that probably wouldn't be correct at that point.
And how do you differentiate that on the SAT? Like, how do you know which one is the right choice?
Not easy. I'm trying to give you sort of a conceptual understanding of each of the punctuation marks, but there really is no clear grammar rule, Catherine. I'm sorry to say that this is hard for me too. It's just something that you will have to learn, both from the concepts that I'm providing you now and from the readings that you will absorb. And however, I will make a note here because people use punctuation wrong all the time. Let me tell you, I'm not an expert by any means, but I see mistakes on the news, on like Fox News or CNN. I see mistakes everywhere. I can't help it because I'm like obsessive about it. So if you guys really want to have good understanding of how these things work, don't take things as a golden rule just because you saw it on CNN, just because take a lot of examples. Try to see what are the specific factors that usually mean that one thing is going to be there. Okay? Because this is really, really difficult. Camila, go.
I have a question. If this sentence was in Spanish, we normally will put after the colon comillas. Is that correct in English as well?
Let me tell you why it wouldn't and why it also wouldn't be correct in Spanish.
Okay.
You put comillas, quotation marks, when you're quoting someone, when you're quoting their exact words. So there are different ways of writing quotes. If I'm trying to put information that someone else has said, you know?
Yeah.
Out of all the Pope said, this is the message that you need to know. This year's Easter Mass will be celebrated remotely. Do you guys hear that?
Yes.
Okay, let me see if I can figure this out for a sec. Let me see. Oh, I think it's fine actually. Okay, fine. I'm sorry. That's kind of threw me off a little bit because I do want this recording to go well. And it's very difficult. I struggle with technology. So sorry about that. Moving on to quotation marks. Oh, what a coincidence. Okay, quotation marks. They are used for several things. Mostly, they are used to express things that other people said in your writing. Both when you're borrowing a quote from someone else's writing, or when you've created a character in your story and you're saying what they said in their own words. A general rule that I want you guys to keep in mind if you use quotations, well, first, they are not easy to use, so don't use them a lot. Use them when you think you need them, when you think they'll contribute, and use them mindfully. Always double, triple, quadruple check how quotations work and if you're using them right, because there's many different rules that I can't go over. Try to keep quotations with the original wording. The point of using quotations is giving other people a voice in your writing, bringing other people in, like inviting them to the party that you created, right? And to do that, you want to sort of keep their original voice. Otherwise, you're just rewriting what they said. So you should always keep quotes with the original words. That's pretty much a golden rule that is seldom broken. And I will explain when it is broken. Okay. Quotation marks can also be used for nicknames, sort of like, I don't know if you guys heard about this guy that went to the moon, Buzz Aldrin. So you would write his name, something, quotations, Buzz Aldrin, to sort of say that that's not his real name. It's like a nickname. Jargon, if you guys don't know what jargon is, jargon means technical vocabulary of some discipline or area. So technical vocabulary in engineering or in, or like what we're doing now is jargon of, you know, writing or grammar or whatever. It's technical language that not anyone would understand. It's specific to a certain area. I know, Camila. I'm gonna wait until this slide is over. Peculiar vocabulary is another case in which you use quotations, and I'm gonna show you how I actually have an example of that because that's kind of complicated. And then another, oh, this is not actually a use of quotation marks. This is a use with quotation marks, which is parentheticals. Parentheticals are statements that are not in the original train of thought. They're sort of a side comment that is not within the original plane of thought. And I also have an example of that. The first example is actually a parenthetical. It's a quotation of a character, and there's a parenthetical in the middle. So I quote, "Let's go," she said. She said is my parenthetical. See how it's like a comment that's inserted? They're not going away forever. So the interesting thing about parenthetical is that we could really write this sentence two ways. We could write "she said" in the middle between those two exclamation sentences, or imperative, no, sorry, whatever, it doesn't matter, like exclamatory sentences. Or we could also write it in the end. Why do you think we write it in the middle? Anyone? Raise your hand and I'm gonna call on you. Don't unmute yourself. Camila, if you want to answer, keep your hand raised. If not, put it down for a sec. Okay, fine. Do you want to answer, Camila? Okay.
I don't know the answer. That's the reason why I'm not.
Okay, fine. It seems like people just want to hear from me. So I will give you that pleasure. The reason why we put the parenthetical expression in the middle and not in the end is because I want to read this quotation. I mean, what I told you is you want to help the readers know exactly how they're supposed to do things when they're reading, right? Know exactly who is talking, how they're talking, when they're talking, all those things you don't want them to be actively thinking and trying to determine, right? You just want them to know from the way you write it and the way you punctuate it. So putting this in the middle gives us a chance of showing the reader who's saying it before the quote's even over, so they can read the rest already knowing who's saying it, right? Otherwise, they'll know who's saying it at the end when they've already read the whole quote without really knowing who was saying it. Does that make sense? It is definitely helping your writing to be clearer. Camila, I know you're not understanding, so I'm just gonna go ahead and restate myself in different words. You are basically taking the first chance that you can get to tell them, this is how you're supposed to understand this quote. She's saying it. Because I have, say, 10 characters, and I want you to know that these 10 people having a conversation, she's the one who's saying this. And I want you to know as soon as possible, so that you don't spend a lot of time trying to figure out what I'm doing with my writing. Does that make sense? Good. Moving on to the second example, which might even be a little more complicated. This is about peculiar vocabulary. Listen to the sentence clearly and how I am enunciating it. And pretend I'm sort of like a psychologist who sees humans as some sort of calculation, some sort of mathematical equation. A smile is nothing more than a facial expression of pleasure. Do you guys understand what I did there with the quotation? Does it make sense when I speak it? Sort of? Okay. How you use peculiar vocabulary in this case is I'm using quotations around smile to sort of make it sound weird, to make it sound foreign, to sort of set that image that you have of a smile being a very natural word and understand it as a psychologist understands it. For a psychologist, a smile is not, you know, a sign of happiness. It might just be a facial expression that indicates pleasure. So he's kind of pissed, you know, he's like, stop. A smile is nothing more than this, you know, it's nothing special. And so I put smile in quotations to sort of make you see it the same way I see it. A quotation can also be used to indicate to the reader that they're supposed to think it's when they think it's weird, not just when the writer thinks it's weird. And an example of this would be, you know, the bottle danced on the table. It's, for example, I'm giving an explanation of how the bottle was moving, but I know that the word dance and bottle don't really fit that well, and that the reader's gonna know that because they know that bottles don't dance, right? Because they're inanimate objects. So I want them to know that I know that they'll think it's weird, right? So I put it in quotations. Does that make sense? Cool. The other ones are easier to understand, so I don't have examples for those. The apostrophe. The apostrophe, I didn't write too much about it because you'll mostly just use it for two things. You can go and read everything you want about the apostrophe on your own time, but this is a timed lecture, and this is what matters to me. The apostrophe shows possession. For example, Maria's dog. Maria apostrophe S, dog. We want to show that the dog belongs to Maria. And then contractions. Contractions is when we make two words shorter and join them together. We use an apostrophe to symbolize the letters that we lost. But also, it's not only words, it can also be like a year. The 20s with apostrophes to symbolize that 19 that is not shown there, you know? Does that make sense? Okay, good. Apostrophes are pretty easy. We're not really gonna spend a lot of time talking about questions regarding that. There's a lot of specific case things that you could learn, but that's not what my class is about. The hyphen. Hyphen is also something that you'll just find. Sometimes you won't really use it that much. It's kind of a case-by-case basis thing. Hyphens are used for compound words, which if you remember correctly, are words that are made of more than one word. But compound words are not always written with hyphens. They're sometimes written just like as two words that go together with no space. Sometimes they're written with a space, and sometimes they're written with a hyphen. And sadly, I know you maybe have questions about this. I think someone had a question about this in my first class, and I can't answer it because there is no grammar rule that tells us when to use a hyphen, when to use space, and when to not use anything. Point is, it's just something you'll learn on a case-by-case basis. The truth is, it's not really hard because there's not really too many words like this. And the words you will use, you'll either already have seen or you'll be able to consult on the internet. So you'll be fine. And the second thing about hyphens is that we use them, just like in Spanish, at the end of a line when we want to separate a word to not leave that awkward space in the end that sort of just looks bad. So we separate a word in keeping the syllables intact. We can separate a word, but we have to keep the syllables intact, just like in Spanish. So, C, T, next line. Does that make sense? Okay, and for compound words, we separate them in a special manner. We don't want the meaning of the word to be misunderstood because we separated it in a place where it shouldn't have been separated. So compound words we can only separate where the first word ends and the second one begins. Does that make sense? So city state could only be separated city hyphen state. Does that make sense? Very cool. Hyphens are easy, so let's move on. The dash. Ooh. Yeah, this one's not easy at all, but I love it because it's a great medium. The dash shows something that I love to do, which is interruptions in the train of thought. I'm the kind of person who puts a ton of side notes. I'm like talking about something and I stop and I talk about something else and then I go back to my original line and then I go back to something else and I come back to my original thing. And the way you express this is with a lot of dashes. Obviously, don't use a lot of these in your writing. I do not use a lot of these in my writing. I do use them when I speak though. The dash shows a parenthetical explanation. That's the first use. Parenthetical, if you remember correctly, parenthetical means something that is sort of out of the general line of thinking. So look at this example. Lorenzo loves coins, shiny, flat, two-faced circles of metal, because their appearance appeals to him. Can you sort of tell that shiny, flat, two-faced circles of metal is outside of my original line of thinking? It's exactly like it's working as an appositive here. It's working as an explanation of my noun, of my noun point, just like I would use with a comma and then my explanation and then a comma. However, there are some reasons why a comma appositive doesn't really work that well in this case. One, because we already have commas inside the explanation. And two, because I want this to be a little farther removed from my idea than just a comma, you know, because a comma is a you know, a slight little swerve in Mario Kart, but this is even stronger than a semicolon, because this is not part of the same general line of thinking. This is like I suddenly moved to a different track and then I came back to my same track to race again. Does that make sense? It's like the little cloud guy didn't really get me back to the same track. He moved me to another plane and then brought me back. Does that make sense? Cool. And I know this is difficult. I'm sorry for not being able to give you a better explanation. This is hard for me too. Second use of a dash is, oh no, sorry. This is actually the first use. Read it like a side note. This is exactly what this is. It's like a side note. It's something that, it's like a post-it that we put in the middle of our conversation, talking about sort of one of the things that we're talking about here, but it's not keeping with the same general line. It's like, I want to talk about coins because I'm not going to really bring it back later, but I know that talking about coins is not exactly what I was doing. So I'm putting those little dashes there. But it also works, dashes also work as a deadpan conclusion. What is a deadpan conclusion? Some of you might not be familiar with the term deadpan. Deadpan is sort of in a very cut and dry, concise manner of a statement, you know, just is something that sort of leaves no room for doubt. It's a very strong, self-assured statement. Like, I know what I'm thinking. I really know what I'm thinking, and I'm saying it in a few words for you to really understand it. And I'll show you an example of why an M dash sort of works like that. The mechanism of a dash, as I understand it, is it subordinates an idea just like a colon does. But instead of being an exact explanation of the other, it's like it makes it stem from or expand on the idea of the other, or say it in less words, sort of. The colon sort of shows an additional explanation, sort of narrowing down, you know, like the Pope said this, and we bring it down to exactly what he said. In this case, we're not doing exactly that. We're saying, look at this sentence. Ariana is kind, caring, and beautiful. She's the woman that I love. I'm not exactly explaining why Ariana is kind, caring, and beautiful. We're saying that those things are why she's the woman that I love. You know, that they're closely related and it's a subordinate relationship. She's the woman that I love is sort of coming from this other sentence, you know? I was talking about her distinct qualities and I was like, there's no better way to describe it than just this, she's the woman that I love. And that's what we call a deadpan conclusion, because it's a very self-assured statement in a few words that expresses a big feeling, you know? It's just cut and dry, puts it all out there. Does that make sense? Cool. Does anybody have any questions about the dash? I know this is difficult. Nope. All right, let's move on to ellipsis points. Great. We are actually, wow, this is going way too fast. Wow. Ellipsis points represent one of two things, or I guess, yeah, I was sort of like one of two things, but the second thing sort of is divided into two feelings of the same thing. The first thing is omitted material. This is just a cut and dry tool for you when you're quoting something. So say that I'm quoting a speech from the US president, and he was talking about today, blah, 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 and then he said, was the greatest day of our lives. But today was the greatest day of our lives is really what I care about in that speech. I don't care about all the rest. And it was a very long paragraph to get to that second part of the quote. So I use ellipsis points after today to mean that there was stuff going on in between these two quoted writing pieces. I just don't want to put it there because it's too long and it really does not portray the meaning that I'm trying to show. Does that make sense? This is a very simple tool to use. Doesn't lead to a lot of confusion. All right. The second intent of using ellipses points is trailing off or hesitation. If you guys don't know what trailing off is, it's sort of when I don't really know what I'm saying and I talk like this and my voice gets sort of low and I kind of just like pause, like, and yeah, so that, it's exactly that. That's what it is.
In Spanish we say divagarse.
Yeah, it's sort of, but it's not exactly divagarse. It's when you are divagándote, you do this. Muletillas, you trail off. You're like, you're sort of doubting, hesitating. That's the second part of this idea of trailing off. And trailing off sort of shows hesitation anyway, because you're like pausing. It just doesn't always show that you're doubting. It might just show that you're really deep in thought sometimes. So like when when someone's about to go on a trip and they're having second thoughts because they think you need them, just think about that and you're like, I'll be all right. Sort of like leaving that pause because you know that you need them. You just don't want to tell them. Like, what's going on. You're not really doubting yourself, but you are trailing off because you don't really want to go there, And so this is how we'd use it, for example. I'll be all right. He trailed off. With that sort of, if you remember, parenthetical remark that we used in quotes, like he said this, she said this. Does that make sense? Are ellipsis points clear? I'm sorry. Parentheses. Parentheses show definitions, examples, and abbreviations. They also show side comments with a changed tone. My voice sounds weird because I think I want to cough and I'm not sure when it's going to come. There it is. Might come back again, but we'll see. First example, this is actually the second example, sorry. This is an example of an abbreviation. The University of Southern California, parentheses, USC. So when would you use this? You use this when you're writing about some very long association or company or some proper name that you don't really want to be mentioning over and over again. You think it's really long, and it is, right? You can't be writing an essay where you mention the University of Southern California every 2 or 3 lines because you need to. But you need to mention it. So you use the acronym, USC. But what happens? You can't really use USC right from the get-go, from the beginning, without explaining it before because your reader might not know what you're talking about. So what you do is you write on the first line, the first time you refer to it, the University of Southern California, parentheses, USC, so that they know that from now on, moving forward, you'll be referring to the University of Southern California as USC. Does that make sense? Pretty clear, right? Okay, so second example that I wrote is actually a reference to an example, pun intended. The sentence is, independent clauses, parentheses, like the ones shown above, are the quintessential element of writing. So parentheses, in essence, they show, oh, sorry, I'm gonna put this on silent so it doesn't bother us anymore. Parentheses show sort of also like that thing that I told you about em dashes, where you're moving onto a different track. You're not really talking about the idea that you were expressing. It's not vital to the meaning of your sentence in the very least, but you do think that it'd be cool to put that there at that specific point, like in this case, so that your reader, if they read independent clauses and they don't know what that is, or they're asking themselves, well, like, sure, but where's an example of them? I want to see. You're like, oh, like the example shown above, so they know, oh, there it is. That's what it's talking about, right? So you want to put it there right next to the word that it's talking about, but you know that it really does not belong in the same line of thought. So you grab the little cloud guy and you take it to the other track for a second. Only this time you're not really doing the M- thing where you are explaining it or clarifying it. This is actually a completely different idea. This is a different sentence that has a different tone. Because this could be a very formal style of writing, and then this could be like a comment that you're doing to the reader about where they should be looking for information. So it's like you're changing the tone and more too. It's more than an M-, if that makes sense. Does that make sense? Okay. And yeah, this is just hard. You'll never understand it completely. You'll just be sort of kind of work on that intuition that you'll have for your own writing and for when things should be used. The third example is this side comment sort of use that we could do with a changed tone as well. In this case, what we're doing is basically we're talking to someone and then we're like bringing them and like, hey, this is happening too. Like we're just sort of taking them aside and giving them a little comment in a different tone, like whispering. So look at this. Laura is here for a job interview. By the way, she's the woman whose husband was arrested a week ago. Just so you know, I'm gonna let you know so that you're mindful of hiring her, you know? But I don't want her to know that. So it's like a very, look at the sentence and you're gonna see exactly why I should use a parenthesis and not like another medium here. The first sentence is a very formal, declarative, sort of like a monotone sentence of, that's just stating what is. And the other one's gossip. The other one's gossip. I'm taking the hiring guy aside and I'm telling him like these little things of information that wouldn't really be appropriate to show in a formal transcript or a formal piece of writing that describes what went down, you know? It's like a side comment. And it changes the tone. That's why we use a parenthesis and not something less sort of alienating, if that makes sense. All right, and definitions, I'm sure you know how to use these. Like writing a parenthesis right next to someone and right next to something to define it. That's something that you should know how to use, and if you don't, I encourage you to go look it up. All right, brackets. Brackets are like parentheses, but square. And they actually do have a different use. They're not just like you can interchange them. We use them for quotes, and we use them for three purposes to modify quotes in three different ways. You know, I told you that we don't modify quotes, right? I did tell you that we don't change the wording of quotes because we want to keep the person's original voice, right? However, we sometimes have to. There are three cases in which we have to modify quotes, or at least there's a strong motivation for us to consider modifying them, right? The first one is a simple correction. You want to correct the quote because you need to. And I'm going to show you an example of this. I'm going to give you a context and I'm going to explain how this first sentence works. You remember the ellipsis points mean there's something going on before that I'm not putting there because it'll just blur the meaning of what I'm trying to teach. They, quote, have learned their lesson. Now, what this is doing is think about this scenario. Sandri gives you a speech and I'm there. She tells you, remember, like you did something wrong. Suppose you did something wrong. And she says, you have learned your lesson. Or he talks to like one person, like Camila, for example. And she says, you have learned your lesson. She points at you and she's like angry at you. And then I'm like struck by that. It's like, for some reason, it like strikes an impression in me and I want to write about it. But I was just an observer there. So I write, they or she, and I use the brackets to change the pronouns and the verbs to avoid this very, very wrong sentence of they has learned her lesson, or they you learned your lesson or have learned your lesson. Sorry. Does that make sense? I don't want that, obviously. And honestly, having that mistake there is much worse than changing your quote. So what you do is you put a little bracket on it and you correct the word to the correct form of that word, if it's a verb or if it's a pronoun. So I say they have instead of has, and there instead of, you or your. Does that make sense? I will make a little side note here about this medium. We usually don't use it much because it's first, not easy to do. Second, if you notice, this doesn't really look that good. It doesn't really look spectacular in writing to have so many punctuation signs so close to each other. So we try to avoid it. However, you will see it a lot, for example, in journalistic articles, like political articles, that people that interview people and they want to quote a lot of sources in the writing, but they know that they're writing in a certain form, and quoting directly will completely mess up with the reading's capacity to keep up with what they're trying to say. So they do use these little brackets, and you'll see them. The reason I learned about brackets initially was because I was really curious as to why they use them in a specific political article that I was reading. So yeah, that's where you'll see them the most. You won't use them too much. Okay, another example. An example of the comment sort of bracket usage is this. Grid bracket, now we'd say AIDS, is a real disease, and we are ignoring it. That was actually an exclamation, but mind my lack of emotion there. Well, for all of you guys who don't know, AIDS wasn't actually called AIDS when it first began, when there was a lot of prejudice and people didn't really want to acknowledge that it was a real disease. It was called gay-related infectious disease. So yeah, pretty offensive. So we did change that. But if I was writing an article about, say in this coronavirus time, I was writing an article about the government's policy towards coping with pandemics or infectious diseases, and I wanted to establish precedents of how the government has handled other similar crises, I could mention this, and I could directly quote some maybe AIDS activist in their own words, but I want to make a side note so that the reader is not offended by my usage of that word, and two, so that my reader actually knows what I'm talking about, because most people probably won't know what it was. I mean, I didn't know what it was until I saw it on a Grey's Anatomy episode. So yeah, there's that. Third example, this is about the third purpose or intent for quote wodification, which is to signal or determine or express a mistake in original wording. So I did tell you that in as much as you can, you want to preserve the original wording of what the person said or wrote originally, right? Because if you're trying to bring other voices into your writing, you want to sort of let them be heard exactly as they spoke, right? Because that's the value that other voices have to bring to your writing. And so you don't want to change the words, but what if they did this? They said, "You're taller than me," and they used "then," which is completely wrong. What if you didn't put anything because you don't want to change it? People will think it was your mistake, or they wouldn't really know. They might think it was your mistake, and do you really want to risk that as a writer? Because if you have this mistake and you're writing an original, like a professional article or scientific study or whatever, I would be like, I hate spelling mistakes. I hate this kind of thing. I hate it so much. And I would be immediately turned off by a writer like this. And just think about, like, I don't know. I'm not even like an admissions counselor or anything. I'm not anyone who matters at this point. I'm just a student. And I see it that way. Imagine how people who have studied to check writing like this would feel about it. They would definitely know something's off. and they would definitely mind that it's off. So what you do is you insert a little bracket with the word sic, which in Latin means thus, to say this is exactly how it was worded in the original saying. And I know it's wrong, but I have to put it there, you know? I'm just letting you know that it's a mistake. And it's better to do this than to change the word, okay? Even if you change the word with a bracket, okay? Because you don't want to change your voice, your source voice, right? You just want to not make you look bad, right? That's what you want, really. Questions about brackets? This took a while.
Teacher, so we use brackets just between quotation marks.
Uh-huh.
Okay.
And yeah, so all of these are quotations. I mean, if you see, all of these are really you quoting other people. And these uses that I gave you, if you try and generalize them to other things, they don't really work, because the thing is, in your writing, you don't have to signal that you corrected something. You just write it right. And in your own words, you don't really change a tense and show that you changed it. You just put it right. And in your own writing, you just use maybe a dash or a parentheses to show that whatever you're writing is now called something else, or comment on it. You know, we have other tools to show commenting, right? I showed you those parentheses and dashes. So yeah, you don't really need them outside of quotations. Yep.
Thank you.
This is actually, I just want to let you know that I know it's difficult to use. It's not easy to remember all these things. You won't use them much, especially not in admissions essays, but you will use them as you become actual college students, hopefully, and you write academic writing. You will be asked to quote many, many sources, and you will try and quote them in different ways so as to not seem like you only have one trick up your sleeve. You know, you will try to use all of the complex strategies that you can to make your writing the best it can, because the way you write things matters, not just what you write. That's the truth. Some of the most interesting stories are written about very, very dumb things. So yeah. Moving on. This is actually the last slide, and time's actually up, so I'll be quick. Italics. Italics are cursiva, if you guys don't know. And we use cursiva to express several things, or no, not several, two things, basically, or mainly in writing. The first one is something that you will definitely find useful, because if I know something about Paraguayans, and this is something that I might know about international students in general, is that they love putting their culture on display. They love flaunting their culture and showing the admissions counselor just how much they love their country and just how much they're in touch with culture and bori bori and the mercado and their abuelita and their tia and all of those things. They love to put words in Spanish, because the truth is it just doesn't feel the same way to say it in English. I did it too. And yeah, so italics are used to express unfamiliar foreign expressions. Some foreign expressions Americans will know. You know, they will know what siesta is. They will know what maybe, you know, what valet is, or what chauffeur is. Those things they will know. And so we don't write them in italics because they're common knowledge. But when it's a specific ethnic, like, you know, object like bori bori or mercado, we do kind of want to write it in cursive, because they probably will not have any idea of what I'm writing about. So my example is, I had a plate of bori bori dash cornballs and chicken seasoned in some mysterious broth and left the mercado. Now this is assuming that I already said what mercado was before, that I expressed what mercado meant when I got to the mercado, and this is later on in the writing. That's why I'm not explaining mercado anymore. I do want to keep my explanations to at most a sentence, because otherwise my sentence will be super long and have a plethora of dashes and parentheses, and we don't really want that. We want to keep our punctuation clean and to periods and commas mostly. We do want diversity as we need it, but we don't want to overuse it, you know? Because some people think that using a lot of fancy punctuation scores them points, pun intended. It does not. It looks ugly. It really looks ugly if you're trying to use something just for the sake of using it, like using a semicolon over and over and over, unless it's a strategy. Because there are strategies and ways of using them correctly, but we have to be mindful that that's what why we're using them, and not just, oh, I think a semicolon will impress someone. No, it won't, unless you know what you're doing. That will impress them, that you use them at the correct points in time, not that you use them, period. Because let's be honest, by this point, anyone who is applying to the US and who hopes to get into a good college will at least have been exposed to these. So they'll really not be separating between the people who use them and don't. They'll be separating between the people who use them correctly and who don't. The second reason when we use italics is for emphasis. So look at this sentence. I'm going to repeat myself one last time. There are numbers on the screen and all you have to do is memorize them. Think of me as a scientist who's trying to tell his subject for the 1,000th time what they have to do, simple instructions, and they can't get it right. So I just say, I'm gonna repeat it one last time. There are numbers on the screen and all you have to do is memorize them. And I wanna emphasize the most important words so that they know exactly what they're supposed to do, because they need it spelled out for them. That's what I'm doing with italics when I want to really bring the reader's attention to something, because human minds, they are designed to find the odd one out. In an entire screen with thousands of straight lines, you are hardwired to find a diagonal one. You will find it within 1 second or two. That's what italics does. It immediately draws your attention onto the word. So if you don't really want to use it, if you are not really intending to use such a strong medium to draw the reader's attention, don't. See that I'm using it in a very specific context. I am using it as in, I'm going to repeat it one last time. There are I'm like fed up, you know? It's a very specific tone of writing that takes this specific punctuation or communication medium, if that makes sense. Does it? All right. So we're done with the lecture part. I want you guys to ask me any questions that you have about any of the slides, any of the concepts. And then we'll move on to our essay reading, and then we'll do an interactive activity on the essay.
I have a question.
Yeah?
Yes, I want to know if the symbol of the hyphen and dash are the same, like the guion are the same.
No,
Are they the same?
they're not. A hyphen is, so el guion is a hyphen. The dash is 2 hyphens. So you can either represent it using 2 hyphens following the other, or you can have your computer modify it for you, or find it in the symbols. But it cannot be the same length. Otherwise, it'll be wrong. And if whoever's reading, if your reader is as obsessive as I am, I'm definitely going to notice. I am definitely going to notice. So yeah, Catherine, your turn.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, like, when are we sure that we put the dashes and not the commas? Because usually you put like an idea between commas also.
Yeah, and I'm going to go back to the slide for a sec because I did explain that. It's just, I know, not very clear because nothing is in punctuation, really. It's weird that punctuation's job is to make things clear, but punctuation itself isn't really clear. It shows a lot about how much we understand our own way of thinking. But yes, let me make that difference again. Look at this example. Dash is used for 2 purposes, and you're interested about the first purpose, the one about the parenthetical explanation. Parenthetical explanation is sort of acts as an adjective of sorts to a word. And I think that's where the difference lies between when you use it as a comma and when you use it as with a dash. Is that when you use it with a comma, it is still acting as an adjective that's part of the original sentence. But when you use it between dashes, it's farther removed so that it really is not acting as an adjective. It's instead acting as a separate idea, as Lorenzo loves coins. Coins are shiny, flat, 2-faced circles of metal. Does that make sense? I'm just not writing the sentence again.
No, yeah, it does, teacher. Thank you.
Good, good. It is hard to explain this, so I'm glad I can actually get my point across. Now, Kathy, your turn.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, could you use parentheses instead of brackets in the middle of a quotation? Or does it have to be brackets for it to be correct?
For what purpose? Tell
For
me an
example-
example.
Yeah. For example, in one of your examples, when you were talking about the AIDS thing, like you put the brackets and you put now called AIDS or something like that. Yeah, now we'd say AIDS. Could you, in that case, use parentheses instead of brackets
Well,
to express that?
look, I want to begin with a disclaimer. If you guys don't know what a disclaimer is, it's sort of like a statement that says like, I'm not trying to mislead you. And that's what I'm trying to say here. I'm not trying to make you believe that I'm the ultimate authority on punctuation. Punctuation is a very ambiguous subject. And, but I am going to say that to make this class, I did look up stuff online from original guidelines. And if they tell me that to write a comment within quotations, I will use a bracket, I will use a bracket. So I don't have any other reason for that. As I said, there's not a grammar rule. I think the distinction is made because we're sort of talking about a different kind of sentence, you know? When you're saying a comment about your own writing than when you're commenting on someone else's words. But that's all I have to offer.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Someone else? Anyone else? This is a hard topic. I mean, I know that I want to get to my interactive activity, but this is not easy. So if you have any doubts, just ask now. I'll give it 3 seconds. 3, 2, 1.
Okay, me. I have one question.
Pressure.
So just to emphasize what Kathy said, we use parentheses when we want to like highlight or give an opinion in something we write, and we use brackets when we want to add something or just to change something of other people writing.
Yeah.
Do you kind of understand me? Yeah.
Yes, I do. So parentheses are used for several things, and one of those things is to make a side comment where you are not really staying with a general line of thought, when you're just like making a comment about the writing sort of, or in a different tone. But it's only when you're the one saying it. You know, entre paréntesis. Have you ever used the expression entre paréntesis? It's like,
Yeah.
entre paréntesis is like an explanation of your own explanation. You don't really get to say an entre paréntesis for someone else, you know? That's, I think, why we make the distinction. Because when you say entre paréntesis, you mean you're trying to explain what you said. And it's not really appropriate for me to try to explain what they meant. I don't really know what they meant. I can interpret it according to what I would mean or what I want to mean. And that's what we do with the brackets. We're using the brackets to modify the writing, not in the way that the writer meant, but in the way that I mean it, in the way that I want to use it. Got the difference?
Yeah. Thank you.
Good.
Yeah, that's a
No
perfect
problem.
answer.
All right, so let's get onto this little essay. We will see. Okay, we will read this essay also from Johns Hopkins website because I'm lazy. But they do the job. You know, it's not easy to find Common App essays because I didn't write a ton of Common App essays because I had to write only 2 because I applied for 2 years. I might have written more, but I rewrote them because they weren't really the way I wanted them to be. So I probably shouldn't be showing you those as good examples, you know? All right, so this is another one of those essays that worked from Johns Hopkins. This, I think, oh, I forgot to write the name, so I'm sorry. I think it was Julia or something, whatever. She wrote an essay on potatoes. So if the last essay was too literal, you will see that this essay is not. It is using a very metaphorical vessel to carry over the message. And it does a lot of things well, and it does some things not too well, and we'll get into that. But before we get into the essay analysis, we'll actually analyze it in terms of punctuations, and I will want you guys to ask questions about punctuation choices that you're not sure about, because that's what we're practicing today. And then we will get into the essay analysis itself. All right, without further ado, let's begin this reading. If you had to choose one food to eat for the rest of your life, what would it be? Having answered this question, asked of me many a time, I realized that such an inquiry must be considered practically. The correct answer would keep me happily sustained for the rest of my years, whereas the wrong choice could leave me tormented until I wither away from monotony. If I chose macaroni and cheese per se, I'd be trapped consuming glutinous pasta, tacky milk fat, yellow dye number 5, and copious amounts of sodium forever. But if instead I call upon my contentment understandings and assess my options accordingly, I may arrive at an indefectible conclusion. And after much deliberation, I believe that I have come to such a response. Potatoes. These tubers are the perfect sustenance due not only to their nutritional qualities, but most notably to their remarkable versatility. Potatoes may be prepared in a myriad of dishes. Creamy mashed potatoes come first to mind, with their fluffy hills of whipped bliss grazing one's tongue so delicately. The thought of golden tater tots follows. Deep fried potatoes cooked perfectly so as to create a slow crunch when chewed. Then are characteristic French fries, shoestring or steak, skin on or off, baked potatoes, latkes, hash browns, gnocchi, all respectable meals. And one must not forget potato chips when searching for a light snack. Oh, potatoes, how I love you. And when asked what to eat exclusively for the rest of my life, I will enthusiastically respond, potatoes, for by picking one, I choose an abundance. To a casual onlooker, this question may appear inconsequential in its hypothetical nature, but as they say, you are what you eat. My inclination towards the varied is not contained to my food habits. It is a recurring theme throughout my life. I regularly switch from my mom's house to my dad's. I've moved 12 times. I have a 15-year-old sister and a 2-year-old brother. I'm a dog and a cat person. This variation tends not to leave me with an aversion to commitment, but with a disposition towards diversity. I am interested in many things, so one must understand how I have struggled, faced throughout my education with the question, if you had to choose one subject to study, one occupation to pursue, one thing to do for the rest of your life, what would it be? I love to play viola. I get a rush communicating without words to my quartet members in order to convey a musical message. I am at my happiest reading a good book. Their complex stories captivate me, and I aspire to write a novel of my own. I want to make laws that improve my country. All people should have a shot at the American dream. I am passionate about protecting the environment. Reducing our effect on global warming is of the utmost importance to me. I want to help those in need. People still don't have access to clean water, and I want to use my privilege to help change that. I strive to become fluent in Spanish. Traveling the world is a dream of mine. Recently, I have discovered that I really like to code. I'm sure in the coming years, I will explore things I didn't know I was interested in. I don't have an answer to what exactly it is I want to do for the rest of my life. I love English and political science, but I have yet to find such an all-encompassing response as potatoes. What I've realized, though, is that I don't have to sacrifice all for one. For each of my interests, I learn things that contribute to who I am and shape how I see the world. Eventually, I will focus my path. And when I do have my answer, I will go forth with the knowledge I've gathered from each of my various interests, and I will never stop learning. Little clap, one clap. All right. Comments? Who has a comment?
I have a question about the dash, actually.
Yes, Sol.
Well, as you can see, the person writing doesn't like separate the word before using the dash, and I'm wondering like if you need to use a separation or if it can use without separating, like the word and then the dash.
So there isn't a specific style you're asked to write in for your application essay, and as it turns out, they're both correct. I think it's neater separating by a space before and no space after, but you can do before and after, and you can do none. So, yep, it's correct either way. Other
Thank you.
Sol, yeah, sorry. Sol, you were asking? Or, oh, you said thank you. Okay, someone else. Questions?
No, I just said.
Okay, teacher, so I do have a question about like that paragraph that starts with creamy mashed potatoes. Like, is it using in a good way like the dashes? Because I just see like she's putting a lot of stuff just together. I just want to know if it's correct.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And the truth is, it's not wrong because, as I said, when it comes to compound nouns, there isn't really a golden rule. And it's a stylistic choice in this case. She likes it, and I think it fits really well. I think her writing, one of the things that this writing piece really has is it looks really sophisticated. The words she uses are very sophisticated. They're very descriptive. The punctuation that she uses, the choices that she makes seem to all be really clean and really well thought out. And I think this hyphen use works perfectly for me. So what she's doing is what the hyphen does there is it turns it into a compound noun, right? And compound nouns are really easier to be understood with a hyphen in between, because if we did not use a hyphen, it could either be mashed as an adjective or mashed potatoes as a compound noun, and we really wouldn't know. So I appreciate her choice, even though it's not the only one we could make. We could write mashed potatoes without the hyphen with no problem. So yeah, I hope that answers your question.
Okay, thank you, teacher. Yeah, it does.
Kathy, you have your hand raised.
Sorry, I forgot to lower it down.
Oh, it's okay. Fine. Anyone else? I want questions, guys. I'm gonna call on you anyway. So, oh, oops.
I just wanna no. Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
I just want to say that while you were reading the essay, my sister came and interrupted me, and I lost track of what you were reading. So I kind of read halfway through then. So just in case you ask me something and I don't know the answer, I'm already warning you that I was interrupted.
Thank you. Now I will make sure to ask you a question. I'm kidding. I understand. This is not ideal. I'm sure you guys have heard someone walk by and not interrupt, but like, I'm sure you've like heard some noise while I'm teaching my class, so it's completely fine. I understand. Just let me know, and don't overuse it because I won't believe you anymore. I know. This is the first time, so I just like to be funny and lay out those rules so that when that time comes, you can't tell me I didn't warn you. So anyone have any questions, or am I just gonna start calling on you?
I wanted to ask, what was the question specifically for this, like the prompt for this essay?
Oh, the truth is, I don't know. I don't get the prompt, sadly.
It looks like the question is what's what's the career that you want to follow? Because at the end, she talks about her career.
Yeah.
At the end.
Yeah. But and you're right. But let's leave this this idea of that being the question more as the general theme, than the actual prompt, because we cannot assume what the prompt was without actually seeing it, which I didn't, so I don't really know. Yeah. Anybody have any questions? Come on, come on.
Teacher, just to be sure, I would like to know when you use quotation marks, you don't need to use a dot at the end, right? You can let it there and it will finish the paragraph.
So let me try and explain this. It's not that you don't need to use it. You don't need to use it after the quotation, but you do need to use it. If your quotation is a sentence in and of itself, you put the punctuation mark in it, not outside the quotation. So in this case, our quotation is someone asking a question. So the quotation mark stays inside and we don't put it outside. That's what we do.
Thank you.
No problem. We never use double punctuation though, like one period inside and one outside, if that makes sense. Never do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Teacher, I wanted to ask, in the third paragraph, these two verbs, one. At the end of the sentence, it would be best if she used like a colon, maybe after versality.
Let me talk. Let me see. It's this, right?
Yes,
This is
a colon or maybe a parenthesis. I don't know.
where do you want to put that?
After versality. Versatility.
Okay.
Wouldn't be too long.
I see what you mean. So let me read it again
Mhm.
out loud. See how it sounds. I mean, I know the answer, but I do want to like show you guys with more than just my explanation. Okay, let's see. These tubers are the perfect sustenance due not only to their nutritional qualities, but most notably to their remarkable versatility. Potatoes may be prepared in a myriad of dishes. So, okay, if you were really paying attention to how I worked with my voice there to read this, there is quite a long pause between versatility and potatoes. And why isn't only due to grammar rules or propriety, it's due to the fact that our sentence is pretty long already. And we don't want a sentence that runs on a lot. We have already reached a point where we have 2 commas in the same sentence, which is not a little amount, you know, it's not a small amount. And by using a colon, we would use a third punctuation that does not finish our sentence. So the first reason why we don't use a colon is simply because of that, because we want the reader to get a break, you know, because if someone's reading it like I am, we are grateful for the fact that there's a period there and not a colon.
Mhm.
The second reason, however, is that our sentence is already very long and explanatory, you know, so we don't really need to. And then also the topic of the sentence is not the versatility. The next sentence is explaining the versatility, but versatility is explaining the tubers. So if we put a colon there, it would be unclear what we're explaining. I mean, it wouldn't be so unclear because we would know that it sort of makes sense because of the context. But it would be unclear in formal terms because our subject is not really the subject of our sentence, if that makes sense.
Totally. Thank you.
Okay, cool. This is simply understood as the natural progression in thinking. And that's why we use a period. All right. Someone else who didn't ask a question. Who can ask a question? Anyone? Come on. All right. I'll ask the question.
Teacher,
Okay. Who's this?
sorry. It wouldn't be like better if she put it like an exclamation mark on the on that like interjection, like "Oh potatoes, how I love you," or is it like more professional just using a point?
Well, in this case, I would think it's more of a stylistic choice. It's really about the style she's going for. And I think I do have something to defend her though, because your choice is not wrong. It is not wrong at all. But this is something that we'll learn in a little bit when we are talking, when we have all the basics down, when we go on to tone and style and these general, more broad feelings of the writing. But if you can follow my reasoning, she in this writing is sort of putting forth a very specific tone. It's like British humor. She's sort of putting this tone that's funny, but at the same time doesn't show a lot of like emotion. You know, it's like a declarative sort of funny. It's what I like to call like British humor, you know? And so you can see that in all of the previous sentences, she has never really shown a lot of emotion at all. She uses a lot of descriptive language to create humor, and but she talks pretty matter-of-factly, which means she uses a lot of declarative sentences with periods. So I think that in this case, the stylistic choice of using a period works better with the tone she was trying to put forth, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
However, I do want to make clear, Catherine, that it really depends on the case. And what you said was definitely not wrong. And I would definitely not be mad to see that as the punctuation mark that was chosen. However, I am trying to like explain why she did that.
Okay, thanks, teacher.
Cool. Anybody else? No? All right, so let's get into a little bit of the broader theme of this essay. Let's ask a little bit of the bigger questions, not just, you know, why she used this word. I mean, we can use that too, but let's try and understand it in the light of the whole context of the writing. Who here has questions about things like the theme or like transitions or like, could the sentence be built another way? Is this paragraph the most effective strategy to portray this emotion? What is she trying to, like, it can be questions about something that you would like to see and don't know why it's not there, or also questions about something that you don't understand. Just think, I'm sure questions will come up. Yes.
Something more about the style that you wrote in and like.
Yeah. Go ahead, Kathy. I just don't want you to use the chat because I can't see it if you're using that. Okay.
She probably froze.
Yeah, I don't know what happened, so we'll move on to someone else while she's doing whatever she's doing, and then we'll get back to her. Anyone else? Previous question?
Oh my gosh, no.
No? Is that your final answer?
I'm preparing my question. That's what I'm saying.
That is a valid answer. Anyone else with a question that's actually ready? Leah?
I would
Yeah.
like to read again the end of the essay, please.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I'll read it for everyone because it's kind of not nice if you just read it and not just do nothing. So, I don't have an answer to what exactly it is I want to do for the rest of my life. I love English and political science, but I have yet to find such an all-encompassing response as potatoes. What I've realized, though, is that I don't have to sacrifice all for one. For each of my interests, I learn things that contribute to who I am and shape how I see the world. Eventually, I will focus my path. And when I do have an answer, I will go forth with the knowledge I've gathered from each of my varied interests. And I will never stop learning.
Well, personally, I will like it a little bit more if she mentioned that stuff about the potatoes again at the end and not in the beginning of the paragraph.
Yeah, I agree. I'm all for metaphors. I love being able to tell a story through another vessel. I did a ton of these in my essays. I could really read you more than 20 essays where I use different metaphors to talk about the same topic. However, and she used a brilliant metaphor, really. I mean, The potato metaphor, I think it's beautiful. I think it's a wonderful metaphor. I think she does a great job of describing potatoes. I think the language she uses to describe the potatoes is wonderful. It's really well written, tasteful, and it looks great. However, when it comes to talking about the topic that she really should be talking about, not so good. Because first, it seems like she takes her metaphor too far. It seems like half of the essay is really just talking about potatoes and she makes no connection to her interests. I think that the first time she mentions it is here. And this is over half, like after half of the essay is already gone, you know? And this was supposed to be the essential topic. So mind that, you know, is a great metaphor, very well written. However, the broad understanding of the essay and the progression of ideas kind of lacking in this case. And that carries over all the way to the end because the point is the metaphor and the literal topic should kind of feed off each other, not feel like we're kind of taking the spotlight away from one to talk about the other. And that's a little bit how it feels like in this last paragraph. She tries to tie it back in with this. But what is that? It's one sentence. In the light of having like half of the essay divided, the essay divided into two different topics, which we don't like. We like to divide the essay in terms of a progression or of a feeling, but keep it on the same topic. We don't want to divide the topics. We don't want to seem like we're talking about one thing and then we're talking about another thing. And that's a little bit of how it feels like here. It's not that she doesn't try. It's not that she doesn't have an awareness of having to tie it back or of having to transition. It's that she doesn't do it really well. Because this could be written in any other essay, really. I mean, this could be any other essay. This is no defining quality that we can tie back to the specific person of the specific essay. This is what you write when you don't really know what to write. This is what you write when you want to write a conclusion, but you have no idea what you're going to write. So you just write I realized that I can follow all of my varied interests in college. I love how all of my interests develop me as a person, and I am such a diverse person. I love diversity, and I realize that all of these things contribute to who I am and are going to all work together to make me become a better professional. And but don't worry, I will eventually focus my path. And when I do, all of these things are actually going to help me. They're not going to hinder me. It's very basic. It is something that I've seen a million times because I've done it a million times. You just have to make it better. That's a simple truth. So yes, good observation. Someone else.
Me, teacher, please.
Yes.
I do have another question. Like,
Okay.
I just realized how you said that she talked a lot about potatoes. I don't know if you can hear me. She talked a lot about potatoes and like not very much about what like herself and her interests and stuff. So I just want to know if it will be better like to just summon up those paragraphs, those two paragraphs, like these tubers and creamy mashed potatoes, like in a shorter paragraph that summarizes all what she's trying to say? Or is it okay like that and she should just have written I don't know, more about herself before?
Okay, so obviously these are questions that I cannot answer in 2 words. Because there's different stylistic choices that come into play here. It's not just a simple answer of what is wrong and right. I think these 2 paragraphs, they look beautiful to me. I think to this point, this essay is fantastic. I think there are few things that I can reproach until we get to that, oh, potatoes, how I love you. That's the first thing that I have a real issue with. The rest of it can sound a little bit corny, food pun intended. But it's really good. It's really well written and it stays on topic. It just makes it seem like potatoes are the topic, not her application. So as I see it, she can do 2 things. One is make her essay about potatoes. Who says she can't? I mean, you know, they want to know you. And if they want to know maybe you want to write an essay about, your interest in cooking, something that you really enjoy and something that you spend your time in. And so you choose the topic of potatoes and you explain how you can prepare all these different dishes and why potatoes are your favorite vegetable because they just open this whole new dimension for you in cooking. That would be a great essay. And I think this setup is awesome. However, one thing that we have to keep in mind is that this is an application essay. You're trying to sell yourself. And though a brilliant essay about your hobby and your interest could really work, because it could, I'm not saying it could not, and I don't discourage you from doing one, there is a strong motivation, a strong gravity towards talking about yourself and talking about what you can achieve and your interests and all of these things. So if you're seeing that as the purpose, which would be the most, the most normal or common thing to do, then yes, you should make it shorter. You should make this whole thing a little bit shorter and then maybe tie in a little more references to the other part, because the other part is sort of lacking in potatoes. I mean, there is no potatoes here. There is no potatoes here. There is no potatoes here. So if you really took a second to outline this thing, you would really, really quickly notice that something's wrong. And I hope you guys are able to, if you write an essay like this, because there is something seriously wrong. However, I'm sorry, you go, Catherine.
Sorry.
No,
Okay,
no.
so my point actually is, do you think there's any unnecessary paragraphs or sentences that we can summarize and like make it a little bit clearer? That's just my point, because I'm just reading all this stuff and she's like talking about potatoes and herself and her interests and what she does in her house and that she's a dog and cat person. And I actually don't see like how it relates. Well, I see that she wants to like show it's all related, but I don't see it actually relates in one.
I know exactly what you're talking about. I'm going to answer your question first, and then I'm going to explain why my answer is what it is. No, I don't think there's a lot of unclear or unnecessary information here. The problem is she has two topics. She's speaking very clearly about two different things, and she has to choose one. So the problem here is not that there are words that are too much. It's that there is an entire topic that is too much. That's the truth. So there isn't really any specific sentences I take away from here. Really, I would just shorten the whole thing. I would make it a briefer thought, a briefer idea if I wanted to talk about my admissions chances and I wanted to sell myself. Or if I wanted to talk about potatoes, I would delete the part when I tie it back to my interests altogether. And I would maybe, just make an essay about cooking and about how cooking represents my problem-solving skills and my creativity and my capacity to, I want to be a chemist maybe. And so how my ingredients are my substances and all that stuff, But here the problem is that not that she's not concise, that she's not clear, or that she's doing something wrong in terms of micro strategies. The macro is wrong. The whole thing is structured the wrong way. And this you'll be able to avoid very easily if you have an outline, which I'll teach you to do, so don't worry. You won't have this kind of essay. However, what I did want to say before you ask your question is, look at this girl. She got into Johns Hopkins and they featured an essay in the Essays at Word. Just think about what you guys can do if you can see all this stuff that is wrong with this essay. You guys are good. Just think about that for a second and feel good about yourselves. Your chances are pretty good the way I see them. All right, let me see. We have 14 minutes, so let's keep going. I think this essay has a lot of potential to keep analyzing and keep going in depth into strategies that you guys will be able to use or avoid. So keep them coming. I don't want to be the one who asks the question here. This class is for you, so you should be taking every opportunity you have to ask questions. So come on.
Hi, I have a question. or more like
Okay. Which it's about some paragraph or something that you want me to find.
I think it right there is good. It's about like the transitional sentence that she uses,
This
and it's
or
I
this.
don't really get which one is the transitional sentence because it feels like it's kind of rushed because it doesn't like it just separates the two topics way too strongly, and it's like black and white, and you can tell there's a difference, and nothing kind of like prepares you to go to the other part of the essay.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't. I'm gonna stop you there because that's more than enough to talk a while about. Yes, or I mean, no, it doesn't. And something I love about correcting writing is how much you can tell about how the writer worked on the writing by reading it. And you can just tell, I can just picture this person figuring out this super creative, super outlandish topic for their essay. I'm going to write my application essay about potatoes. Who's going to do an essay similar to that? And look, it got into Johns Hopkins' essays that worked. So something she did right. And there's a lot she did right. However, I can see this person thinking, oh, geez, I have to tie potatoes back to why they want to choose me as an applicant. I don't know how to do that. I really don't know how to do that. And what I see is that she never figured it out, really. I mean, she figured out a way to glue bones with glue, you know? And bones aren't glued with glue. They're glued with joints. And that's what we talked about with transitions or with conjunctions or whatever. I don't remember where I used that analogy. But yeah, she just didn't know how to tie them together strongly enough. And that's pretty sad because for me, it ruined her essay as a very good example, you know, because this is a person who knows exactly what she's doing in terms of grammar, in terms of imagery, in terms of descriptive language. It's beautiful. However, it just kind of takes so much away that she felt the need to bring her idea back to her application context, but she didn't know how to do it. And you can just tell. Because this would be, you know, this is the beginning of her transition. And this is the other transition, really. So we would say that transition is this. And yeah, it's messy. It's not very clear. It's not very strong. And yep, that's all I have to say about it. You can tell that she struggled finding that transition, and I applaud you for finding it. Okay, other questions? Catherine, you're raising your hand. Is that because you have a question?
No, sorry, teacher. It was just for the last question I had.
All right. Someone else? I want to hear you ask questions. Come on. I haven't heard a question from Camila. Yep, go.
Okay, there you go. Can we go back to the beginning, please? I think, yeah, in the second paragraph, when she writes, if I choose macaroni and cheese per se, I'll be trapped consuming glutinous pasta. Can we eliminate that comma and put a dash? Tacky milk, fat, yellow, blah, blah, amounts of sodium. Eliminate that comma again, and then write forever period. Will that be a better option than writing between commas?
Let me see if I understand you. You
Okay.
want to put a dash here?
No, glutinous pasta. Eliminate that comma and then put a dash.
Okay,
There.
got it. So here.
Yes, and then the other one, amount of sodium. Eliminate that comma and put and then forever period. Will that be a better way to express that idea, maybe, or it's better just between commas?
Yeah, so no, but thanks for asking because it gives me a little space, a little room to go into dashes and stuff again because it's complicated. Let me tell you why it's not.
Okay.
What is this glutinous pasta, tacky milk fat, yellow dye number 5, copious amounts of sodium? How would you describe this in terms of components, grammatical components? I would describe it as a list, right?
Okay. Yeah.
It's a list of equal rank because we're talking about what I'd be consuming. All of these are things that I'd be consuming. So they're, as a word, they're fulfilling the same role in the sentence. They're all
Yeah.
bad things that I don't really want to consume, right?
Mhm.
So how do we separate lists? With commas, with commas and maybe and at the end, like she used. And we especially don't separate lists with a dash in between the items. In any case, it would be better to use the dash before.
Yeah. Yeah, I
Right?
get what I did wrong right now, actually. When you start explaining, I was like, yeah, that was a dumb question. Yeah, I now I get why. Yeah.
Okay. In any case, if we used another punctuation that could kind of fit, we could use a colon after consuming. I'd be trapped consuming, colon, this, and that. But it really does not sound as good. It just really flows for me this way. I like the way she did it, and I am a fan of using lists and a lot of parallel structure. That's called parallel structure, which you're going to learn in one of the future lessons, I think. And it's really effective sometimes to give imagery and give a little context. It takes a very few words to give a lot of visual images or sensorial images. So it's a good strategy. I like it.
Okay, thank you, teacher. Yeah, I got it now.
No problem. Someone else. Okay. I'm going to have people who didn't ask a question now. So Andres, your turn. Ask a question. Whichever question. I don't care which question.
Yeah, so I have a question, but before you told us about like the problem with the potatoes and what you just said, like I think that is something that makes the central theme of the essay a little bit like confusing. This is why I don't know, someone asked about what is which one is the question, because I don't think because of she left the story of the potatoes, and she goes she jumped again to another place, let's say. I think that's make a little bit confusing. So I actually don't know. If I read this essay, I wouldn't know which one is the question.
Yeah. Yes, you're right. And that should be something that we should really care about because we want our meaning to be as clear as possible. And one of the strategies we use for that is deleting the question and want to show it to people and ask them, which of these questions do you think I'm answering? Show them the prompts. And if they know, then you know your meaning is clear. And so I think it's a very smart observation that, that there is a contest for the central theme. And that's exactly what I was saying. There's two topics here. There's two central claims in this essay, and that is really working against her. If I can use an analogy to illustrate that feeling, it's like you are building a skyscraper because this essay is a skyscraper of an essay. It's really good. Besides that, you're building a skyscraper on very shaky foundation. So, un edificio muy alto con cimientos que no funcionan. That's basically what you're doing. And I guess they worked enough. I have to say that they're not asking you to write professional looking essays, right? This essay is a good essay. I mean, she's 17, 18. This is good. And they definitely liked it. However, you guys know, it's not perfect, not near perfect.
Teacher, I just want to ask you something. Like, I was thinking about it, and I just I don't know what is wrong about the micro parts of this essay, as you said, like the columns or the way she uses. Like, I really tried to find the mistake, but I can't, and I don't know if it's just me or what. And I know that the macro part is wrong, but what about it? Like, what mistakes can you find here? Like, I just want to know.
So you want me to find macro mistakes or micro mistakes?
Like micro, the tiny ones, like I don't know, punctuation or something, because I can't really. I tried, I promise.
To be honest, at simple glance, I don't remember any. I think this is near perfectly written in terms of microstructure, in terms of sentence structure, in terms of grammar and syntax. It's really, really nice. And I think that's what she's doing really well. She just carries this fun, but at the same time, formal tone so well. And it is really beautiful to read. This first part about potatoes, I just think it's brilliant. But yeah, the problems in the macro mostly, I would say, really.
I have a question. So you mentioned before before reading the essay, you went through all the stuff like comma and stuff like that, and you mentioned that you use italics when you want to stand something out in a sentence.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
in here it says, "Oh potatoes, how I love you," and when asked what to ask exclusively for the rest of my life, comma, I will enthusiastically respond and put quotation marks, potatoes. So do you think she could use italics instead of that? I'm just asking.
Great question. I love these questions because they go at the technical matter of this class, and that's exactly what I want from you guys, from your questions. And those are questions. Yeah.
And second, so that is the micro part, and
Yeah.
in the big part would be when she put the quotation mark saying potatoes. Was she trying to be sarcastic? I don't know. I'm just wondering.
Okay. So let me illustrate this for you because this is obviously more of a concept question. And I like that about your question because these are things that you're just learning probably in this class, at least like clearly stated. So I understand the confusion, but it is correct in why. We use italics, yes, to highlight. But first, that's not the only strategy that we have of showing strong emotion. It's more of a, it depends. It depends on the exact case. So in this case, let me see what she's saying. When asked what to eat exclusively for the rest of my life, I will enthusiastically respond, potatoes. So what she's setting up there is a quote. The quotation marks don't show emphasis or sarcasm or something, or like that word is weird. They're a direct quote from her. It's like, if someone asked me this, I would respond, potatoes. So I think that's why this is correct. And I understand exactly why you got it wrong too. That makes a lot of sense. So a very good question. And oh my God, I forgot about the macro. I don't remember. What was your question on the macro stuff?
No, you answered both. So I asked you, the first question was whether you could switch from quotation mark to italics, and you respond that question. And the second one, which was macro, was if she was trying to be sarcastic by using the quotation marks and saying potatoes.
Okay. So people, it's 3:30 and this class is 2 hours, so we're basically done. If anyone has any questions about the essay or the content, you can stick around for like 5 or 10 minutes. And I know you have a class at 4, so I won't keep you, and it's all up to you if you have time. So yeah, we're done. I hope you have enjoyed this class and have a great day.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Teacher, is the next class the one we don't have classes, or is not yet? Because I read and
Did I write? I wrote that in the syllabus that I sent you, right?
yes, and I don't know if the next class or we still have some time.
It is. No, wait, sorry, no, it's not, because I said on Monday, because I'm traveling back home. I'm in the US right now and I'm traveling back home, so I'll be on a plane on Friday up to like 12:30, and I really don't want to have to prepare a class and give it.
No, it's
right
okay. I just wanted to know.
Oh no, don't worry. I'm not going to. I'm just explaining why. So yeah, it's next Monday.
Okay, thank you.
Catherine, you asked a question.
Me or the other Kathy?
I forgot. Yeah, thank you. I don't know.
Yeah, maybe it was me because I just talk a lot. But I wasn't like asking anything. I think my hand just
Okay,
stood there like.
no problem. Anyone else, or are we all bye-bye?
I
want
was.
to-
No, you go
Yeah.
first.
Go ahead. No worry.
No,
Leah?
mine is. It's actually long, so please go ahead.
Okay, Dio, do you have an actual question, or are you just saying bye-bye?
No,
No,
Oh, sorry.
No problem. I have an actual question from the content. A quick question.
Okay, quick. Yeah, go.
So about the parentheses, I want to ask you if we can first put the abbreviation and then then clarify the abbreviation, the complete name in the parentheses, inside the parentheses. Can we do that?
Okay, let
For
me
example, in the second example that you put, it was the opposite. For example, I don't know,
I'm trying
health
to.
office. For example, I don't know, community office, and we will say here the HPO and in parentheses health office, health community office.
I think
It
it
will
works.
be
I think it works both ways. I just like it better the way that I wrote it because you're initially, the parenthesis is like what you're introducing, It's easier for me, or it's better, it looks better for me because the University of Southern California is what you're actually replacing. And it's the parenthesis expression, a parenthetical expression that explains the other one, not the other way around. So, I like it better when the bigger one is outside and the smaller one is inside, because generally, it's kind of like you're trying to replace the bigger one by the smaller one. The smaller one's the one that you're going to use after. So it works better for me, but I don't think it's wrong if that matters. So yeah. And Mia, we're going to the question, and then we're done.
Thank you, teacher. See you.
No problem. See you.
Mine was just about the essay and the macro composition. Like,
let's look at it. Let me see. Okay. Yep. What is it? What about it?
do you think that I was thinking about this? Maybe she could have this essay and better if she used like all these dishes that she described and comparing them to the things that she liked. I don't know, every dish with something like, I don't know, what she mentioned, political science, something like that, and compare that every dish to something. And I think that this sentence, "Oh, potatoes, how I love you," that maybe will be the perfect closing sentence for the essay. If she stated all that, like explain that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm gonna stop you there because it's getting to be a little long, and this already is enough for us to.
Yes.
This is over. But yeah, I like your observation because you're not only looking at what is already written, but you're asking yourself, what could I write to make it better? And you're looking at the macro, which is a very good sign of says a lot about your writing skills. That being said, let me see. Let's look at it. I think the reason why I always write an outline of an essay and try to have a clear concept before I begin is because this happens if you don't.
Mm-hmm.
If you write it just on a whim and then you try to turn it into what you want it to be, not gonna work, because this happens. What happens is you're not able to completely merge or fuse your two topics or your metaphor with your literal. And what we want to achieve, if we want to be amazing writers of these essays, is we want to make our metaphor fuse with our topic. We want to compare both and sort of establish parallels every step of the way. And I think your idea is fantastic. I think you could talk about a very powerful plate, a very loud plate that reminds you of a politician, or you could talk about a very complex recipe that reminds you of chemistry, or you could talk about this this very by the book recipe that if you don't do everything exactly as it is, it's going to go wrong, and you talk about law. And all of those things, you could create these real joints for your bones, right? To make your metaphor not work against your topic, but work with and elevate it to a much better level. That's exactly what you should be trying to do. So good question.
Thank you.
Yep. And about just to address the last, like, oh potatoes, how I love you, I don't really think that would be the best sentence to finish with, because if you're trying to merge your two metaphors, you're gonna want the college one to be the one that ends up as the final claim, as your conclusion. You're gonna want the potatoes to support it and to create a parallel, but you're gonna want your literal meaning to be your topics and your interests. But I think this would be great for, like, the introduction, like the first sentence of a conclusion. Like, oh potatoes, how I love you. And then you give a little 2 or 3 sentences, and then you finish with your claim about what you want professionally or your interests, because that would be the greatest way to keep tying it back. What we do with metaphors, the way that we keep the reader sort of having both in mind and keeping that parallel strong, is we keep bringing it back. We keep
Constantly
going back and forth in ways that make the reader really make them equal, to really carry through our metaphor effectively. So that's what we're trying to do here.
Thank you.
Okay, no problem. Okay, I am gonna cut it off now. I'm sorry. If you guys had-
Bye.
Bye, teacher. Thank you.
Bye, teacher.
Bye,
Thank you.
teacher. Thank you.
Have a nice week.
Bye-bye. See you on Friday.
Yep.
Bye-bye.